always felt that it was silly for Australia not to have one of its own citizens as our head of state.
We are disconnected from the baggage of history. That's contributed directly to this being our moment.
The one thing that is also clear from all of the polls is that an overwhelming majority of Australians do not want to keep the British monarch as our head of state.
Here in Sydney, just a week to go before Australia votes on whether to get rid of the Queen and embrace a republic. The very fact of the vote is being seen by some here as symbolising a dramatic crossroads between the old and the new Australia. The White Australia policy ended 26 years ago. Already there are 120 significant ethnic groupings in this country. So what is the new Australia? A figment of a few glitzy Australian film directors' imaginations, or a bold, assertive nation at ease with itself and with the confidence to lead peacekeepers into neighbouring East Timor? Nowhere identifies stereotypical suburban Australia better than Ramsay Street, even if in reality it is called Pin Oak Court. This is the street that stars in the TV soap Neighbours. So is this where you find the real Australian? Is Neighbours' star character Harold Bishop it?
Oh God, I hope not. No, I don't think so. He reflects the moral standards of an age gone past, I think a lot of older Australians might agree with his outlook on life. I mean, I think I do too. I mean, let's face it.
Is he a monarchist?
I don't think so. No, I think he's a real Australian.
I mean, to us outsiders, he is good old white Australia.
Is he?
He is.
Oh, and yet he would he would carry a banner down any main street for multiculturalism. He would indeed.
Would he?
Oh, my word, he would, yes.
But that's a huge contrast from, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
To Australia 20 or 30 years ago?
Yeah.
Yes, very much so, my word. But we have been introduced to the world in the last 20 to 30 years.
Next year's Olympics in Sydney, perhaps the most obvious statement of Australia's coming of age. But it cuts across many facets of Australian life. Peacekeepers in East Timor, not just peacekeeping, but leading the entire multinational endeavour. I talked to 4 prominent Australians about the new Australia and where it's headed in the next millennium. Tetsuya Wakuda, Japanese-born, one of the world's leading chefs.
I think myself is very Australian.
Aboriginal judge Pat O'Shane, the first Aboriginal ever called to the Australian bar. Fashion designer Jenny Kee, worn by many of the world's leading women. And film director Baz Luhrmann, currently directing Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor in Moulin Rouge.
Because we sit outside of the world, there's a sort of a fearlessness and recklessness and a kind of like, well, what do you got to lose-ness. I think the most interesting places to be in anything is either at the very centre or at the very edge. And just very physically and psychologically, we're at the very edge of the world looking in.
Baz Luhrmann has brought the film industry back to Australia. He had to go to Mexico to shoot Romeo and Juliet. Above all, it's the internet that has suddenly connected Australia in a way unimaginable even 5 years ago. Luhrmann's technicians, actors, musicians no longer feel they've left the rest of the world in order to be here.
You know, the net, the web, you know, and so really, I think that's contributed directly to this being our moment, because we are disconnected from the baggage of history, but we are now, we have access to and are accessible from anywhere in the world at any time.
Tetsuya Wakuda came from Japan with nothing. He didn't think twice about dumping his Japanese passport in favour of an Australian one. He feels that even inside Australia, people have become far more open to other people's tastes.
When the very first time I made a sushi type of thing, or raw fish, when 17 years ago, everyone. But now,
Completely natural.
Completely naturally, everybody takes it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's in Japanese called food is culture.
Yes.
It's changing. Time is changing the culture and people, I think.
The new immigrant, Tetsuya, feels both embraced by and part of Australian society.
Western food with Japanese twist. Cheers. Good health.
But in Sydney's Aboriginal ghetto, the people who were here all along do not yet feel either embraced or part of Australian society. This is the abiding scar that the new Australia, the Olympics, the architecture, the film sets are leaving behind.
I don't think that those kinds of physical aspects of the developing Australia in any way signal advancement for Aborigines. Far from it. If anything, far too much of very valuable resources are allocated to those kinds of materialistic issues instead of in fact dealing with those social indicators, particularly health.
Judge O'Shane told me that on average Aboriginals die 20 years younger than other Australians. To her, it will take much more than the current efforts at reconciliation and any talk of getting rid of the Queen.
I don't have any illusions that if we became a Democratic Republic of Australia tomorrow, that all Indigenous health problems, education problems, housing, employment, etc. are going to be rectified. No way. We still have to deal with governments and make sure that they implement the kinds of socially proactive programs which are going to ensure that Aborigines, like other Australians, have their place in the sun.
From Aboriginal pain, from old white Australian neighbours to Oriental noodles, this is a society in change, already multicultural and still travelling towards something increasingly distinctively Australian. Jenny Kee's art, though authored by a half-European, half-Chinese hand, does pay tribute to Indigenous Australia and Aboriginal forms. Though a fashion designer, she has forsaken the pace of the city for the outback.
You luscious, beautiful Waratah. She's a beauty. She's queen of the bush.
She sees herself as the embodiment of this new Australian. And perhaps she's right.
Well, I am an Australian. I am actually what Australia is going to be like in the next 50 years. I mean, we are part of the Asian basin. We are part of Asia. And I think I represent fully I'm Anglo-Saxon, I'm European, and I'm Asian. And I think that is, Australia's future.
Well, now, the sentiment here is for a republic, but many are voting no simply because they don't like the kind of republic that is on offer. The man leading the Republican movement is Malcolm Turnbull, the lawyer in the notorious Spycatcher case in which Big Brother Britain tried to stop publication of an old MI6 spooks book. I caught up with Mr. Turnbull earlier today in his office. Your brush with the British establishment over the Spycatcher affair, was that the cause or the effect of your republicanism?
No, I've always been a Republican. I've always felt that it was silly for Australia not to have one of its own citizens as our head of state. But the Spycatcher experience certainly didn't republicanise me. Actually, it was, the event that motivated me to get active and start organising and starting to do something concrete instead of just talking about it and writing newspaper articles was the 1988 Australia Day celebrations. You may remember we had a bicentenary here, and as I surveyed the magnificence of Sydney Harbour and 200 years of Australian history being celebrated, who did we have as the star speaker, as the most important person on the podium? Not an Australian, but in fact none other than Prince Charles. And as that year progressed, there was almost no public event which we did not import some greater or lesser member of the royal family to preside over.
And yet the extraordinary thing is that neither the yes nor the no campaign have actually dwelt on the persona of the head of state, be it the Queen or Prince Charles.
Well, we've taken great care not to get into a sort of a mudslinging exercise. We have, however, right through the campaign, made it very clear that this is an exercise in patriotism, and what's involved is replacing a foreign head of state with an Australian one. I think the odd thing is that the monarchists never mentioned the Queen. As Paul Keating said, this is truly the love that dare not speak its name. And what they are trying to do is to turn the referendum into a sort of vote as to which type of republic we should have.
But the Prime Minister, John Howard, is saying that the Queen isn't the real head of state anyway, it's the Governor-General.
Yeah, well, that's nonsense. I mean, plain, complete and utter nonsense.
He could get the Governor-General sacked.
The Prime Minister can. Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, but that doesn't make the Governor-General the head of state.
But people are going to be confused. The Prime Minister says the head of state is the Governor-General. The Yes campaign says it's the Queen.
Our parliamentarians swear allegiance to the Queen. The Queen's head is on our coins. It is the Queen's photograph and portrait in public offices. I mean, the Queen is as much the head of state of Australia as she is of the United Kingdom. The difference is that because she lives in the United Kingdom and not here, she has a Governor-General here who does the bulk of the work or the functions of the head of state.
But the other thing your opponents are saying is it ain't bust, so don't fix it. Surely a country that is robust and assertive enough to throw leadership into taking peacekeeping forces into East Timor doesn't need to query who its head of state is.
What we are saying is that an independent nation should look like one, and an independent nation should have one of its own citizens as its head of state. The fact of our independence is a very powerful argument, to my mind, for having an Australian citizen as head of state.
The Republicans are trailing in the polls. The yes vote is outnumbered, if we're to believe them. Does this mean that the Queen is likely to remain the head of state for a very long time to come?
I have no doubt that if there is a no vote cast, the monarchy will remain in place in Australia for a very, very long time. It will be I might say it'll be a tragedy if that is to occur, and no courtesy to the Queen. Because the one thing that is also clear from all of the polls is that an overwhelming majority of Australians do not want to keep the British monarch as our head of state. The Queen, as head of state, is unwanted by Australians.
Can I just ask you one more question? I mean, you've crossed swords with the British, you know the system. To what extent do you think if she is divested of her powers in Australia, it'll have a knock-on effect back there?
I think the debate will proceed in a very different way in the UK. And my own feeling is that the British monarchy will survive for a very, very long time in the UK. I think the difference is that in the UK it will survive because people want it. In Australia it will only survive because Australians have not been able to agree on what to put in its place.
Malcolm Turnbull. And that's it for now from Sydney. Tomorrow night, Malcolm Turnbull and other prominent Australians, both for and against the Republic, will join in a forceful debate for Queen or country here on Channel 4 at 6:30. I hope you'll join us for an hour of Australian argument that may well tell us more about ourselves than we ever knew. For now, back to London.